Hey folks, welcome to the channel. Can you believe we are halfway through winter? I've been waiting for this day. I'm going to celebrate or cope with it, depending on how you look at it, by planning out the garden beds for this year. Now, I've been working on so many projects. I've been making mead, I've been harvesting oyster mushrooms, I've made several different dishes with those and dehydrated what's left over. And I'll show you those here in just a bit. But first, I'd like to share with you what has been inspiring me for the last few weeks. Let's take a look. Now, I teach biology at our local community college, and for the past few weeks, I've been working with my students, teaching them all about plants and fungi, fruits and vegetables, and how to grow things. What could be more motivating than seeing the wonder and fascination on their faces as they learn new things and try to solve new problems? These oyster mushrooms really are delicious, and this frittata could not be easier. I diced up some asparagus and tomatoes and tore the mushrooms into bite-sized pieces. And of course some fresh eggs from the girls in the backyard. So I add a bit of milk and whisk that, seasoned with salt and pepper, and I was ready to go. Next, I added a large handful of smoked Gouda cheese, one of my favorites. Put everything together in a buttered pan in a preheated oven at 350 for about 20-25 minutes until the center was set. And it could not have been more delicious. So this is my garden journal. Every year I just flip through the pages. I always have such a good time looking at old notes, old plans. Some of them came to fruition, some of them didn't. Sometimes revisiting unfinished projects actually spurs me to get up and do something about it. Anyway, what I usually do this time of year is review what I've planted in which beds. And that's important because sometimes certain families of plants can harbor disease or pest issues. For example, the Solanaceae or the nightshade family consists of tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, tomatillos, and many more. And so I avoid putting plants in this family in the same beds from season to season, just in case anything is left over. Crop rotation is just good practice all around. Plants affect the soil health in many ways. There is a plethora of microorganisms in the soil, and the plants themselves exude chemicals and use nutrients differently as well. And so there are a variety of symbiotic relationships where there's mutual benefit between these organisms and the plants. And so there are also lots of negative relationships as well. And so by moving things around from year to year, you're more likely to increase the biodiversity and improve the soil texture and composition as well. And so the first thing every gardener should learn is that a good garden starts with great soil. So I should preface this video by saying that it was filmed in several portions. It's the culmination of 3 different batches of black raspberry mead, or it's often called black cat mead, but technically it's known as a mellow, which is mead made with the addition of fruit. Now, I often use whole fruit, but in this case, as is often the case, I use the pulp from black raspberry jam. You want to make sure it's capped because of moisture content. When it's not capped, it's not ready. It's not at the right moisture content and it'll ferment if you try to harvest it at that point. I'll post the link to this video below. Don't you love a good pesto? Especially with tomato soup? Let's make it. A classic pesto usually starts with pine nuts. I like to use walnuts for their heart-healthy omega-3 fatty acids. I usually just toast them up in a skillet or sometimes the oven. And while those cool, I peel and pulse a few cloves of garlic to give them a head start. And then I like to blend the nuts really well, about 1/3 cup, before adding the basil and the oil. Now I'd remove most of the leaves from the stems in this pack of basil. It's about 2 cups. I'll spread in here. And I also love the flavor of lemon zest and juice. So in that goes. And I like to pulse everything together really well as I blend the oil. About 1/4 cup for this recipe, give or take. And I add the Parmesan last. Sometimes I simply just stir it in. And then I finish pulsing it, adding oil till I get it to the consistency I like. And as always, I taste along the way. This needed quite a bit of salt, about 1/2 teaspoon, and some freshly cracked black pepper. And a final pulse to bring everything together. Yum. Now basil will oxidize and turn dark very quickly, so you want to keep it in an airtight container. I also like to put a layer of cling wrap right on the surface. And so I'll stick it in the fridge if I'm going to use it right away. But it also freezes well, and sometimes I'll freeze it into cubes and then store it in an airtight container. And I also like to try to root the stems. Everywhere leaves are removed, roots can grow out of those areas. And so I store it in water and I change that water daily. And before you know it, there'll be little plants. I can either harvest the leaves or pot them up to grow. In fact, I hope to post a video pretty soon of that process. And now back to the soup. Then I went to the pantry to get some of my preserved tomatoes and a lovely tangy red pepper paste. I made this with fire roasted sweet and hot red peppers. Now today I'm going to be using a food mill because I can these tomatoes whole. This one in particular is easy to use. So it comes with different sized discs depending on how you want to mill your food, or in this case I use it to remove the skin and seeds from tomatoes. Now I often do this at the time of canning. It depends on what I'm working with, what type of dish I'm actually going to make, and how much free time I have. And so I had a lot of these Amish paste tomatoes come in at the same time, and I just decided to skin them but leave the seeds in to save me a little bit of time during the summer when life is just crazy. This Amish paste is an heirloom variety that I absolutely adore. Lots of flesh, not too acidic. But first, I sautéed onions in olive oil. Let them caramelize a little bit just for that extra flavor. And so this food mill is fitted with 3 movable legs. Easily fits over whatever receiving vessel you're going to use. And this one is really sturdy. The spring-loaded lever makes changing the discs very easy. And I think this is the medium-sized disc. It's the one that works best for keeping tomato seeds out. Now, of course, I'm already using canned tomatoes here, but if you were using fresh tomatoes out of the garden, then you would want to either heat them up or freeze and thaw them to soften them and allow them to fit through the mill. And that's just because raw tomatoes would be too firm to fit down in here. And so you just keep twisting in the same direction. Every once in a while you have to reverse the direction so that you can release some of the trapped material. And from time to time you might have to scrape down the side walls so that you get all the material extracted. And you can't forget to scrape the bottom of the disc. Get every bit of pulp I can get. And this red pepper spread is delicious. It is thick and so packed full of flavor. There's a fair amount of heat to this as well, but with all of the tomatoes, it mellowed out nicely. And next came that luxurious pesto. It's so delicious and so garlicky. And of course I had to add my Herbamare. I wish you could smell it in here. Oh, and that pesto. Would you look at that bite? And then I reheated it for supper, and I served it with fried oyster mushrooms. Mushrooms from the backyard, mind you. These were one of my best creations ever. So it's such a nice day today, and I need to dehydrate these mushrooms. I thought I would take advantage and do it outdoors. Yeah. So this is the oyster mushroom. Of course, I've harvested, so they're really easy to just tear apart. This part here is a bit woody, a bit fibrous, so I usually won't dehydrate that, although it'd be fine for soups. Same thing here. You can see these are pretty dried out. I've been keeping them outdoors. I'm just going to fill up this dehydrator tray. This is a really big gnarly one. I'm saving some of these for some creamy mushroom soup I'm going to make tonight, but when they're in this shape, they're much better dehydrated. And that way I can use them to flavor soups, which is what I use to flavor the stock I'll be using for soup tonight. And so it's a good idea to keep everything about the same size so they dehydrate about at the same rate. And so I can fit everything in the dehydrator. They will shrink considerably. Last year I had well over 20 pounds of mushrooms and it dehydrated into just a couple of ounces. And these have actually dehydrated quite a bit while they've been sitting outside. It's been perfect temperature, like a refrigerator out here. And so I've just kept them in this basket, covered up with a couple of towels. And they've stayed in really nice shape. I didn't have room for all of them in my refrigerator, so it worked for several reasons. So luckily I was able to harvest some fresh ones. I think that's probably about all I can get off of there. So I'll use those fresh ones for soup tonight and then dehydrate the rest of these older, drier ones here. Perfect. That worked perfectly. I went down to check and see if there were any other mushrooms, and I got quite the haul of fresh ones. So I'll clean these up for dinner tonight and then I'll dehydrate the rest of these older, drier ones. And so mushrooms usually go for about 110, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So when I click on my raw setting, it automatically goes to 115. So I think that works well. And these were quite dry to begin with, so they will likely not have to go 24 hours. So I had another flush of oyster mushrooms and I decided to make some soup today. So I started by sauteing the mushrooms in a little bit of olive oil and then a bit of butter before adding the onions. And so I let those caramelize a bit before adding the garlic so it didn't burn, and my usual Herbamare and pepper. I decided to use a light beer to deglaze the pan. And then I added a luxurious stock I had made with vegetables and last year's dehydrated oyster mushrooms. And while the whole grain sourdough was toasting, I blended in a little cilantro and celery leaves. And I let it simmer a bit. It smelled delicious. I added sour cream in just the last few minutes of cooking. And what a great way to enjoy these oyster mushrooms from the backyard. So earthy and soul satisfying. And so there's also been something else on my mind for the past week. I'm now the same age my mom was when she died from metastatic breast cancer. And it completely changed my life. It's when I started taking better care of myself. I left a long-time job and pursued a biology degree. And now I'm teaching at our local community college. It's the best decision I ever made. It was hitting 52 that spurred me to start this chapter, this channel, to document my journey. The highs and the lows and the challenges and the joys of finding and following dreams, of living our best lives. Thanks for sharing it with me.